What if I told you that one moment of arrogance could destroy everything you've worked for? That a single act of disrespect could turn your entire world upside down? That's exactly what happened to Nathan, a man who thought he had it all: power, control, and authority. But in just one day, he learned the hard way that no one is untouchable. It all started with an ordinary visit to the grocery store. An elderly woman, quiet and unassuming, walked in like any other customer. But when Nathan, the store manager, dismissed her with cruelty and arrogance, he had no idea who he was really dealing with. He thought she was just another forgettable shopper, until the truth came out. She wasn't just any customer. She was the woman who had built that store with her own hands. And when Nathan realized the mistake he had made, it was already too late. What happened next? A fall from grace, a shocking twist, and a lesson in humility that would change Nathan's life forever. Stay with me, because this is a story about respect, redemption, and the kind of transformation that only happens when life forces you to face the truth. Margaret stepped into the grocery store with a quiet grace, her frail frame wrapped in a well-worn coat. She moved slowly, not out of weakness but out of habit, observing, absorbing. This wasn't just any store to her. It held memories, echoes of a past few knew about. As she browsed the produce section, a sharp voice cut through the air. Nathan, the store manager, barely concealed his irritation as he glanced at her. To him, she was just another elderly woman wasting time, someone easy to dismiss. His voice, clipped and impatient, dripped with condescension as he barely acknowledged her presence. Nathan prided himself on efficiency. He saw customers like Margaret as obstacles, slow, needy, and unimportant. He didn't recognize her, didn't see past the wrinkles and the simple attire. In his mind, she was just another retiree wandering through the aisles with nothing better to do. What he failed to realize was that, decades ago, this very store had been built on Margaret's sacrifices and hard work. She had once been the backbone of this place, though she no longer held the title. Nathan only saw the present, a woman who no longer fit into his fast-paced, profit-driven world. Margaret didn't react. She didn't need to. She had seen this kind of arrogance before, and life had taught her that time has a way of humbling people. With a faint smile, she simply continued walking, taking in every detail of the store that once belonged to her. Nathan, oblivious to the weight of the moment, turned away, dismissing her as insignificant. But life has a peculiar way of revealing the truth, and soon Nathan would learn that the woman he had just disrespected was far more important than he could ever imagine. Margaret may no longer have legal ownership of the store, but in her heart it would always be a part of her. Over the years she had stepped back, allowing new management to take over, yet she still visited often, quietly observing from a distance. She walked through the aisles not as a stranger, but as someone who had poured years of effort into every corner of this place. She noticed the way the shelves were stocked, the way employees interacted with customers, the small details that most people overlooked. To an outsider, she was just another elderly woman shopping for groceries. But in reality, she was seeing everything: the good, the bad, and the things that had changed. She remembered the early days when she and her late husband, Robert, had worked tirelessly to build this business from the ground up. They had spent countless nights balancing accounts, planning promotions, and ensuring that every customer felt valued. The store had never been just about selling food. It had been about creating a community. But now, as Margaret observed from the background, she could feel the difference. The warmth she had once cultivated was fading, replaced by an impersonal efficiency that prioritized numbers over people. The spirit of the store, the one she had fought so hard to establish, was slipping through the cracks. Still, Margaret didn't complain. She wasn't here to interfere, only to watch. She had learned long ago that time moves forward and people must adapt. But something about today felt different. As she continued her quiet observations, an unsettling feeling settled in her chest. Something told her that this visit was going to be unlike any other. For Nathan, managing the store was nothing more than a stepping stone, a temporary stop on his way to something bigger. He didn't see it as a place that held history or meaning. To him, it was just a job, a position that would eventually lead him to greater success. Every decision he made was calculated to impress higher-ups, to climb the corporate ladder as quickly as possible. Customers were just numbers, employees just tools to keep operations running smoothly. He didn't concern himself with relationships or loyalty. Those were distractions. What mattered were profits, performance metrics, and getting ahead. Nathan's approach to leadership left little room for empathy. He rarely took the time to learn his employees' names, let alone listen to their concerns. When an elderly customer needed assistance, he saw it as an inconvenience rather than an opportunity to provide service. If a worker struggled with a task, he didn't offer guidance, he demanded results. He believed respect was something that should be given to him automatically, simply because of his title. But what Nathan failed to realize was that true leadership isn't about authority. It's about influence, about the way you treat people when you think no one is watching. And today, someone was watching. Margaret, though silent, was paying attention to everything. The way Nathan spoke to the cashiers, the way he rushed past customers without a second glance, the way his focus was always on the numbers instead of the people. She had seen men like him before, men who mistook arrogance for strength. She knew that a person's true character is often revealed in the smallest moments. And though Nathan had no idea who she was, he was about to learn a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. As Margaret continued her quiet observations, her sharp eyes landed on a display of apples. At first glance they looked fine, but a closer inspection revealed something different. Bruised skin, signs of early rot, a lack of freshness that she would have never allowed in her time. She picked one up, turning it in her hand, pressing her fingers gently against its surface. It was soft in places where it should have been firm. A store like this, once known for its quality, now cutting corners? She sighed, shaking her head. Some things change, but standards shouldn't. Standing nearby, a young employee named David noticed her concern. He couldn't have been more than 20, still new to the job, still figuring things out. He approached hesitantly, unsure if he should say something. "Ma'am, is there something wrong with the apples?" he asked politely. Margaret looked up, offering a small, knowing smile. "They're not as fresh as they should be," she replied, handing him one to feel for himself. David frowned, pressing his thumb into the soft spot. He could tell she was right. He hesitated for a moment before deciding to do something about it. "I'll let the manager know," he said, turning to leave. Margaret watched as David walked toward Nathan's office, disappearing through the swinging door. She had no doubt that Nathan's reaction would be less than understanding. A man like him wouldn't take kindly to criticism, especially not from a customer he already viewed as insignificant. But Margaret wasn't here to make trouble, only to remind people of the standards they seemed to have forgotten. And if Nathan had a problem with that, well, that was his mistake to make. Nathan barely looked up when David stepped into his office. The young employee hesitated for a moment before clearing his throat. "Sir, a customer noticed the apples are going bad," he said cautiously. Nathan let out a frustrated sigh, rubbing his temples as if this was the last thing he needed to deal with. "And?" he asked, his tone sharp. "It's just an old woman nitpicking, right? People like that always find something to complain about." David shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to questioning authority, but something about Margaret's quiet confidence made him feel like this was important. With exaggerated impatience, Nathan pushed his chair back and stood up. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's see what this expert has to say." As he approached the produce section, he spotted Margaret still standing near the apples, waiting calmly. He scoffed under his breath. To him, she was just another difficult customer, the kind that wasted time complaining about things that didn't matter. "Ma'am," he started, his voice dripping with forced politeness, "is there a problem with our apples? Or is it just that some people have too much free time on their hands?" A few customers nearby turned their heads at his condescending tone. Margaret didn't flinch. She had faced far worse in her lifetime than the arrogance of a young manager who thought he was untouchable. She simply held up an apple and pressed her fingers into the bruised skin. "Would you buy this for your family?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Nathan smirked, shaking his head. "Ma'am, this is a grocery store, not a farmer's market. If you want perfection, maybe you should try shopping somewhere else." The tension in the air thickened. The customers who had been pretending not to listen were now fully paying attention. Nathan thought he was in control of the conversation, but Margaret knew better. Margaret didn't back down. She had spent a lifetime building something out of nothing, and she wasn't about to let a disrespectful manager make her feel small. She looked Nathan straight in the eye, her voice steady. "Being a customer means I have the right to speak up about quality," she said, "and respect isn't something you give only when it's convenient. It's a reflection of who you are." The quiet murmur of the surrounding customers grew louder. Some nodded in agreement. Others simply watched, waiting to see how Nathan would respond. Nathan, however, wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had dismissed as irrelevant. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Look, lady, if you don't like it, you don't have to shop here, simple as that." His words were sharp, but his confidence wavered slightly as the crowd around them grew. Margaret, unfazed, glanced at the other customers. "So is that how he treats all of you when you have a concern?" she asked. A few people shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Nathan's gaze. The truth was, many had experienced his arrogance before, but no one had ever called him out so directly. Nathan clenched his jaw, suddenly aware that the situation was slipping from his control. His usual tactics, intimidation, dismissiveness, weren't working. Margaret wasn't like the others. She wasn't afraid of his authority, and she wasn't going to let him brush her aside. For the first time in a long time, Nathan felt something unfamiliar creeping in, doubt. He had walked into this conversation believing he was in control. Now, standing there under Margaret's steady gaze, surrounded by a growing crowd, he was starting to realize he had severely underestimated her. Despite the confrontation, Margaret chose not to argue further. She had made her point, and she knew that wisdom often speaks louder in silence. With quiet dignity, she turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Nathan standing there, still fuming. The tension in the store didn't fade immediately. People exchanged glances, some whispering, others shaking their heads. Margaret, however, stepped outside, her heart heavy. She sat down on a bench near the entrance, her hands resting on her lap, her gaze lost in thought. It wasn't the humiliation that bothered her. It was the realization that the store she had once poured her heart into had changed in ways she never imagined. She had been coming here for years, watching from the background, hoping that the foundation she had built would continue to hold. But now she saw the cracks, not just in the operations, but in the values. The way Nathan dismissed people, the lack of care in the products. It wasn't just about business, it was about respect. She let out a slow breath, trying to push the weight off her shoulders. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe today had been too much. Just as she was lost in thought, a familiar voice pulled her back. "Mom?" The sound of her son's voice made her look up. Raphael stood a few feet away, his brow furrowed with concern. He had been passing by when he spotted her sitting there, looking more troubled than he had ever seen her. His mother was a strong woman, the kind who never let anything shake her. Seeing her like this made his stomach twist. He stepped closer, his voice softer now. "What happened?" Margaret sighed, shaking her head. "It's nothing," she said, but Raphael wasn't convinced. He glanced toward the store, then back at his mother. Something was definitely not right, and he was about to find out exactly what. Raphael didn't waste any time. The moment he saw the sadness in his mother's eyes, he knew something had to be done. Without hesitation, he turned and walked into the store, his steps firm and determined. He had always known his mother to be resilient, a woman who never let anything break her spirit. So if something had left her sitting outside like that, it wasn't just a minor issue, it was personal. As he made his way through the aisles, his sharp gaze scanned the store until he spotted the man responsible. Nathan. Nathan was standing near the registers, still clearly agitated from his encounter with Margaret. He barely had time to react before Raphael was in front of him, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You disrespected my mother," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Nathan blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Your mother," he repeated, confused. Raphael crossed his arms. "Margaret. The woman you just humiliated in front of the whole store." The realization hit Nathan like a brick, but he quickly masked his reaction. "Look, sir, I don't know what she told you, but stop." Raphael's tone was firm, cutting through Nathan's attempt at justification. "I don't need excuses. I want to know why you think it's acceptable to treat people like that." Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, the arrogance in his posture seemed to falter. Under Raphael's intense stare, he felt a strange tightness in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. He had spent so long seeing himself as the one in charge that he had never stopped to consider the consequences of his actions. And now, standing face to face with the son of the woman he had dismissed so easily, he felt something he hadn't expected. Regret. Nathan felt the weight of Raphael's words settling over him like a heavy blanket. He had spent years building an image of himself as a tough, no-nonsense leader, someone who didn't have time for sentimentality. But now, standing in front of Raphael, confronted with the reality of what he had done, his usual defenses were starting to crumble. I didn't realize," he muttered, his voice quieter than before. It sounded weak, even to himself. The truth was, he had never considered the impact of his actions until now. He had treated Margaret as if she were nothing, but she wasn't just a random customer. She was someone who had built this place, someone who mattered. Raphael didn't let up. "You didn't realize, or you didn't care." His voice wasn't angry, just steady, demanding an honest answer. Nathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could feel the eyes of the employees on him, the silent judgment of the customers who had witnessed everything. For the first time, he truly saw himself through their eyes. He had been arrogant, dismissive, blind to the value of the people around him. His job had become a race for success, and in that race he had trampled over others without a second thought. Taking a deep breath, Nathan finally looked Raphael in the eye. "I was wrong," he admitted, and for a moment, the words felt foreign in his mouth. He wasn't used to apologizing, especially not sincerely. "I treated your mother with disrespect, and I regret it." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He had spent years justifying his actions, convincing himself that his way was the only way. But now, faced with the truth, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He had made a mistake, a big one, and for the first time, he wasn't just worried about losing his job. He was worried about the kind of person he had become. Nathan stood there, feeling the weight of his own words. He had finally admitted his mistake, but now a new fear crept in. What would happen next? He glanced around the store, realizing that people were still watching, still waiting to see what came of this moment. He wasn't just a manager anymore. He was an example, and not a good one. Swallowing hard, he turned back to Raphael. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice quieter now. "But I don't want to be that kind of person anymore." It wasn't an excuse. It was the closest thing to sincerity he had ever spoken in this store. Margaret, who had quietly entered the store again, stepped forward. She had heard his words, and though she was firm, she was never cruel. "Recognizing your mistakes is the first step," she said, "but the real lesson isn't in words, it's in what you do next." The room fell into a hush as Margaret turned to Raphael, then back to Nathan. She could have demanded his resignation, could have humiliated him the way he had tried to humiliate her, but that wasn't who she was. Instead, she did something Nathan never expected. She defended him. "People can change if they're given the right opportunity," she said. "The question is, will you take it?" Raphael folded his arms, watching his mother carefully. Then he nodded. "Actions speak louder than words," he agreed. "And I think it's time Nathan learned that firsthand." He turned to the employees standing nearby. "Starting today, Nathan won't be manager anymore." Nathan tensed, his heart dropping. "But," Raphael continued, "he's not fired. He's being given a second chance, starting at the bottom." The words hit harder than any punishment Nathan could have imagined. A demotion, a fresh start. He would be working as a janitor, learning what it meant to serve rather than control. And for the first time, Nathan didn't argue. He just nodded, knowing deep down that he had a lot to learn. Nathan's first day as a janitor was nothing short of humbling. Gone were the neatly pressed suits, the authoritative clipboard, and the distant stares of employees who once feared him. Instead, He wore a uniform that smelled of disinfectant and pushed a mop across the same floors he used to walk with arrogance. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just a few days ago, he had treated this job as beneath him, looking down on the very people who now worked alongside him. But as he scrubbed a stubborn stain off the tile, he realized something. This was real work, and it was a lot harder than he had ever given it credit for. Every corner of the store now looked different from his new perspective. He saw things he had never noticed before. The exhaustion in the eyes of the cashiers, the quiet frustration of the stock workers, the patience required to keep the store clean and running. He had spent years barking orders, but he had never truly understood what it took to do these jobs well. Now each shift left his muscles aching, his hands rougher, and his pride slowly peeling away. For the first time, he wasn't just managing a business, he was part of it. Margaret watched from a distance, her sharp eyes catching every small change in his posture, every moment of hesitation, every hint of growth. She had seen arrogance in men before, and she had also seen humility bloom where it was least expected. Nathan wasn't there yet, but she could tell. He was starting to understand, and understanding was the first step toward change. As the days passed, something inside Nathan began to shift. So at first he had thought of his new role as a punishment, a temporary humiliation he had to endure. But as he mopped the floors, took out the trash, and wiped down shelves, he began to see the work differently. This wasn't just mindless labor, it was what kept the store running. Without it, everything would fall apart. He started noticing the little things, the way customers appreciated a clean aisle, the quiet satisfaction of a well-organized shelf, the simple respect that came from a job done right. For the first time, he wasn't focused on status or climbing the corporate ladder. He was focused on doing his job well. The employees he had once dismissed started treating him differently. At first, they kept their distance, skeptical of his sudden fall from power. But over time, as they saw him working alongside them, really working, they began to soften. Diego, one of the night stockers, handed him a cold bottle of water during a long shift. "Harder than it looks, huh?" he said with a smirk. Nathan, out of breath from lifting heavy boxes, just nodded. He was learning the same lesson Margaret had hinted at. Every role in this store mattered, and no one was above the people who kept it running. One afternoon, as Nathan wiped down the glass doors at the entrance, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. He barely recognized himself. The man staring back at him wasn't the same cold, distant manager who had dismissed customers and employees alike. He looked different. More tired, yes, but also more grounded, more aware. And for the first time he wondered, had he ever really understood what leadership meant? Raphael had been keeping an eye on Nathan's progress, though he never interfered. He wanted to see if the former manager was truly changing, or if this was just another temporary adjustment before he tried to regain his old position. One afternoon, he decided to check in. Walking through the store, he watched as Nathan worked, quietly, diligently. He wasn't barking orders anymore, nor was he trying to avoid the hard labor. He was scrubbing, stacking, organizing, no complaints, no shortcuts. It was a stark contrast to the man who had once walked through these aisles like he owned them. Raphael approached him, crossing his arms as he observed. "So, how's life on the other side?" he asked, a slight challenge in his tone. Nathan set down the mop, wiping sweat from his brow. He could have reacted with frustration or defensiveness, but he didn't. Instead, he let out a short breath and gave a small nod. "It's different," he admitted. "Harder than I thought." He didn't say much more, but that was enough for Raphael to see the shift. It wasn't just about physical labor, it was about attitude. Nathan wasn't resisting the work anymore. He was learning from it. Margaret, who had also been watching from the background, gave a knowing smile. She had seen enough men like Nathan in her lifetime, proud, stubborn, unwilling to see their own faults. But she had also seen what humility could do. People either let it break them or let it change them. And right now she could see that Nathan was at a crossroads. The question was, which path would he choose? Nathan found himself thinking more and more about the past. Before, he had measured success by promotions, numbers, and control. But now, As he moved through the store, working alongside the people he once ignored, he realized something. Respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you earned. He had spent so much time believing leadership meant being feared, yet here he was, discovering that the real strength of a leader was understanding and valuing the people around him. One evening, as he stacked boxes in the stockroom, Margaret approached him. She didn't say anything right away, just watched him, arms crossed as if measuring his progress. Nathan finally broke the silence. "I see things differently now," he admitted, setting down the last box. "I used to think success was about power, but power means nothing if people don't respect you." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Real success isn't about climbing, it's about lifting others up as you go," she said. "Took you long enough to figure that out." Her words carried a teasing warmth, but they also held truth. Nathan let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Yeah, I guess I had to learn the hard way." He looked around the store, seeing it now with fresh eyes. Every person here mattered, from the janitors to the cashiers to the customers who walked through the doors. He had spent years chasing the wrong kind of success, and now he finally understood what Margaret had known all along. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel lost. He felt grounded. Nathan had spent so much time trying to prove himself to others that he had forgotten about the people who once mattered most. As he worked through his shifts, he found himself thinking about his past, about the relationships he had let slip away in his pursuit of status. And one name kept coming back to him: Eduardo, his younger brother. They hadn't spoken in years, not because of a dramatic fallout, but because Nathan had been too consumed by his ambition to make time for family. Now, standing in a store he once ruled, doing a job he had once looked down on, he realized just how much he had lost. One evening after his shift, Nathan did something he hadn't done in a long time. He picked up the phone and called Eduardo. At first, there was hesitation on the other end. "Nathan?" Eduardo's voice carried a mix of surprise and caution. It had been so long that even hearing his brother's voice felt unfamiliar. Nathan took a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the phone. "Yeah, it's me," he said. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." There was a pause. Then finally Eduardo let out a small laugh. "Didn't think I'd ever get a call like this," he admitted. The conversation wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, unspoken wounds, and things left unsaid. But it was a start, and as they talked about life, about family, about all the time they had missed, Nathan realized something. Change wasn't just about how he treated strangers. It was about the people he had pushed away, the relationships he had neglected. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fix them. Nathan's transformation wasn't just something he noticed. Others were beginning to see it too. Raphael, who had been quietly observing his progress, could tell that the man standing before him now was not the same arrogant manager he had confronted weeks ago. There was something different in the way Nathan carried himself, the way he spoke to employees, the way he no longer saw himself as above anyone. Change isn't something that happens overnight, but real change, the kind that lasts, happens when someone is willing to start over from the ground up. One afternoon, Raphael called Nathan into his office. The former manager braced himself, unsure of what to expect. Had he done something wrong? Was this the end of his second chance? But as he sat across from Raphael, he was met with something unexpected: acknowledgement. "I've been watching you," Raphael said, leaning forward. "You've proven that you're capable of more than just managing numbers. You've learned what it means to work as a team, to respect the people who keep this place running." Nathan didn't say anything at first, waiting for the inevitable but it never came. Instead, Raphael continued, "I think you're ready for more responsibility again, but this time, you'll do it differently." Nathan felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just about a job, it was about redemption. He wasn't being handed back his old title, he was being offered a new role, one that required him to continue proving himself every day. And for the first time, he wasn't looking for power or status, he was looking for purpose. He nodded, meeting Raphael's gaze with something he hadn't felt in a long time: genuine gratitude. Nathan took a deep breath as he stepped into his new role. This wasn't a return to power. It was a new beginning. He wasn't the same man who had once walked these aisles with arrogance, barking orders and chasing numbers. Now he understood that leadership wasn't about control, it was about responsibility. He moved through the store with a sense of purpose, treating every task, no matter how small, with respect. This time he wasn't just managing, he was contributing. As he worked, he reflected on everything that had brought him to this point. He thought about Margaret's unwavering strength, Raphael's tough but fair approach, and even Eduardo, the brother he was slowly rebuilding a connection with. Life had a way of humbling people, and Nathan had learned his lesson. He no longer looked at the employees as mere workers, but as individuals with their own stories, struggles, and ambitions. He made a point to learn their names, to listen, to acknowledge their efforts. Respect wasn't just given, it was earned. One evening, as he stood at the entrance, watching customers come and go, Margaret approached him. "You look different," she said, her eyes filled with something he hadn't expected. Pride. Nathan let out a small chuckle. "I feel different," he admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Margaret nodded knowingly. "Funny how life works, isn't it?" she said. Nathan smiled, realizing she was right. Life had taken him in a full circle, not as a punishment but as a lesson, and this time he was ready to move forward with a whole new perspective. Nathan stood outside the store, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The last few weeks had changed him in ways he never expected. He had gone from a man obsessed with power and control to someone who finally understood the value of humility, respect, and second chances. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore, it was about becoming a better person. And just when he thought his journey was complete, Raphael approached him with one last surprise. "I've been thinking," Raphael said, crossing his arms. "You've come a long way, and I respect that. But I also believe in rewarding growth." Nathan raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. Raphael continued, "I want to offer you something. More responsibility, but in a way that truly reflects what you've learned." Nathan hesitated, his past instincts screaming at him to jump at the opportunity. But this time, he took a moment. "What kind of responsibility?" he asked cautiously. Raphael smirked. "Mentorship, training new hires, teaching them not just how to do the job, but how to respect it." Nathan felt a lump in his throat. He had spent years leading the wrong way, but now he was being given the chance to guide others in the right direction. "I'd be honored," he said finally, the words carrying more weight than any promotion ever had. As he shook Raphael's hand, he realized this wasn't just about a job anymore. This was about making sure no one else walked the same misguided path he had. And that was real leadership. As Nathan walked home that evening, he felt lighter than he had in years. He had spent so much of his life chasing after the wrong things, power, status, recognition, only to realize that true success had nothing to do with titles. It was about people, about how you treated them, and about the kind of person you became along the way. He had been given a second chance, and this time he wasn't going to waste it. Before heading inside, he paused, taking a deep breath. The journey hadn't been easy, but that's what made it meaningful. He had lost himself somewhere along the way, blinded by ambition, but through humility, through hardship, he had found his way back. Margaret had taught him a lesson without ever having to raise her voice. True strength wasn't in demanding respect, but in earning it. Raphael had pushed him to be better, and in doing so, had given him an opportunity to start over. And now, with a new role ahead of him, he felt ready. Nathan glanced at his phone, hesitating for only a second before dialing a familiar number. "Eduardo," he said when his brother picked up. "I was thinking, maybe we should meet up, talk in person." There was silence on the other end, and then a simple response. "I'd like that." Nathan smiled. Growth wasn't just about fixing mistakes at work, it was about fixing them in life too. And as he prepared for this new chapter, he knew one thing for sure. He was finally becoming the man he was meant to be. Nathan's journey wasn't just about losing his position, it was about finding himself. He had spent years believing that success meant power, that respect was something you demanded, not earned. But life has a way of humbling those who refuse to see the truth. He lost everything he once valued, only to discover that what truly mattered had been in front of him all along. People, relationships, and integrity. Now, ask yourself, are you chasing the right things in life? Are you treating people with the respect they deserve, or are you blinded by ambition? It's easy to believe that titles and authority define success, but in the end, it's the way you treat others that truly matters. Don't wait for life to teach you the hard way. Start today. Look around. Value the people who help you, who support you, who stand beside you even when you're not looking. Because one day the tables might turn, and when they do, will you be proud of the person you've become? If this story made you think, then make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's so much more to learn, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.